Welcome back. So we're going to do the last four problems, which deals with both passages. If you recall, the first step was to read passage one piece by piece and deal with the questions just relating to passage one. Step two was to read passage two piece by piece and focus on the questions just related to passage two. And the last step is to focus on the questions that related to both passages 1 and 2. And 49 through 52 all kind of ask about both passages. So let's start with 49. Before we do 49, I want to talk about two different types of passages. There's the argument passage or argumentative passage, and the descriptive passage. The argument passage, basically the author has a point of view. So he or she has an argument. The descriptive passage, there really is no point of view. The author is just describing something. Now, he may invoke authorities and basically talk about different people that have different points of view, but the author himself or herself really doesn't have a point of view. He or she's neutral. So I could just say he or she is describing. So when we look at passage 1 and passage 2 here, let's think about passage 1. Did the author of passage 1 have a point of view, or was the author just describing? Did the author say, hey, space mining is great, space mining sucks, I love space mining, we shouldn't do space mining? Or was he just describing events? He was kind of describing companies interested in space mining and what's going to happen within a few decades and all that, but really no point of view about it. So just kind of more of a description on space mining. Passage 2 was a little bit different. So P1 was descriptive. Passage 2, the author did have a point of view. The author did say, hey, let's be careful. Let's not jump into this. And the author advocated regulations. Because if you look at the last paragraph, passage 2, wanted regulations. And if you look at lines 58, 59, it says that these consequences merit careful consideration. So he says, be careful. It's advocating for regulations. Let's not just jump into this. So when we answer question 49, which statement best describes the relationship between the passages? We need to use this. So again, we don't jump to the answer choices. We want to answer it in our own words. So which statement best describes the relationship between the passages? Well, passage 1 basically describes space mining and how companies are interested in space mining and so on. Passage 2 says, hey, let's be careful. We need to proceed carefully and we need regulations on space mining. So that's our answer. Now let's go to the answer choices. And instead of picking the right answer, let's eliminate the wrong ones. Let's look at A. Passage 2 refutes the central claim advanced in Passage 1. Well, there was no central claim because Passage 1 was a descriptive passage. There was no argument. Passage 1 didn't say, I claim this or I claim that. There was no point of view in Passage 1. So that's incorrect. B. Passage 2 illustrates the phenomenon described in more general terms in Passage 1. Again, no. Passage 2 had a point of view. passage 1 was a description of space mining. So this is kind of saying that passage 1 was descriptive, and passage 1 and 2 were both descriptive, which is wrong. C, passage 2 argues against the practicality of proposals put forth in passage 1. There were no proposals put forth in passage 1. Passage 1 was just basically describing space mining and how it's going to move forward and all that. So there were no proposals, and passage 2 wasn't arguing against the practicality. Nowhere in passage 2 says, hey, this isn't practical, you can't do this. D, passage 2 expresses reservations about developments discussed in passage 1. Well, passage 2 says, hey, let's be careful here. Think we need regulations. And passage 1 does talk about the developments in terms of what companies are doing to get into space mining. So D is the best answer. Now let's look at number 50. The author of passage 2 would most likely respond to the discussion of the future of space mining in lines 18 through 28, passage 1, by claiming that such a future is what? So basically it's saying, what would the author of passage 2 think about lines 18 through 28 of passage 1? So let's read lines 18 through 28 real quick of passage 1. 18 through 28 says, within a few decades, these firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals such as platinum and gold, and the rare earth elements vital for personal electronics such as yttrium and lanthanum. But like the gold rush pioneers who transformed the western US, the first space miners won't just enrich themselves. They also hope to build an off-planet economy free of any bonds with Earth, in which the materials extracted and processed from the moon and asteroids are delivered for space-based projects. So what would the author of passage 2 think about that? We already know that the author of passage 2 says that we need to be careful, that we need to have regulation. So the answer is probably going to be something along the lines of that. Like in the end of passage 2, it does say, but miners, like I'm going to just read from starting from line 83, but miners have much to gain from a broad agreement on the for-profit exploitation of space. Without consensus, claims will be disputed, investments risky, and the gains made insecure. It is in our long-term interest to seek one out, and one being regulations, which is described earlier in the paragraph 79 through 81. So he's saying, hey, without regulations, claims are going to be disputed, investments are going to be risky, the gains are going to be insecure. So again, the clue is going to come from passage 2. So the author of passage 2 would most likely respond to the discussion of space mining in passage 1 by claiming that, hey, all this stuff, all these gains are going to be risky, it's going to be insecure unless we have some sort of regulations, unless we're careful about this. That's what it says at the end of passage 2. Now let's look at the answers and eliminate. A is inconsistent with the sustainable use of space resources. Passage 2 never talks about, the author never says, hey, no, there's inconsistent use of sustainable resources. Never talks about that. B, will be difficult to bring about in the absence of regulations. Well, that's what kind of the end said when we looked at like lines 85, 86, around there. So let's keep this one. C, cannot be attained without technologies that do not yet exist. Never does the author of passage 2 say, well, these technologies don't exist, so we can't make these gains. So that's wrong. Remember, passage 2 has to come out and say it somewhere in order for that answer choice to be right. So that's wrong. We can't interpret here. D, seems certain to affect Earth's economy in a negative way. Never says that. The right answer is B. Now, 51 basically says which choice provides the best evidence. Basically, where's the proof? Where's the line proof to this? We saw it in lines 85 through 87. We read it at the end of the passage, and that is answer choice D. So A, B, C, D. D is correct for number 51. And lastly, number 52. Which point about the resources that will be highly valued in space is implicit in passage 1 and explicit in passage 2? So what point about resources, highly valued resources, is explicit in passage 1 and implicit in passage 2? Basically, explicit means they come out and just say it. It's very, it's not subtle, it's very in your face, it's very clear. Implicit means kind of more subtle. So it doesn't come out and say it, but kind of hints at something. So this is a type of question where you kind of have to be a scavenger hunter and you got to kind of look back at both passages. You don't want to just jump directly to the answer choices. And you want to go back and see, okay, well, where was a point where they made the same point, but it was definitely more in your face and, right out there in passage 1, but was a little bit more subtle in passage 2. And they are making a reference to a highly valued resource. So if we look at lines 29 through 34, it says, in this scenario, water mined from other worlds could become the most desired commodity. In the desert, what's worth more, a kilogram of gold or a kilogram of water? Asks Chris Zacny of Honeybee Robotics in New York. Gold is useless. Water will let you live. And then in 35 through 40, it kind of gives some examples of why water. So basically, in passage 1, it comes out and says, hey, like water is way more important than gold. Water is valuable. So things that are valuable on Earth may be that are very valuable in space may be different than things that are valuable on Earth. Like gold is valuable on Earth, but water is going to be way more valuable in space. It's very explicit here and very clear. Now, if we look at passage 2, nowhere does it kind of say that explicitly, but if we search and look at 73 to 76, let's start reading there. Quote, there's also the emerging off-world economy to consider. The resources that are valuable in orbit and beyond may be very different to those we prize on Earth. So it doesn't kind of come out and say it that water is more valuable than gold, that water is very valuable resources. And, this was an example saying that, different resources are valuable in different places. But it says, hey, resources on Earth may be, resources that we think are valuable on Earth there may be other resources that are valuable in space. So where was it? In line 73 to 76, it's definitely a lot more subtle. So now that we kind of found our answer, we can go to the answer choices, A, B, C, D, and eliminate. Let's just start from D and go up. D, they may increase in value as those same resources become rare in Earth. Well, that's not what we said about increasing in value and something being rare on Earth. C, they are likely to be primarily precious metals and rare earth elements. It doesn't talk about that. B, they will be valuable only if they can be harvested cheaply. That's not what we said. A, they may be different resources from those that are valuable on Earth. That's the right answer. Passage 1 kind of came right out and said, hey, for example, and gave the example of water and gold, saying that gold is valuable on Earth, water may not be so valuable uh, on Earth that it is on space. Water is going to be way more valuable and way more of a highly valued resource. And then passage 2, it's a lot more implicit. So the right answer is A. So now we're done with the dual passage. So I hope this helped. Again, the dual passage is not harder than any of the other passages. We're using the same system we used in all the other passages. We just have to do it in steps. Step 1, focus on the first passage and focus on the questions of the first passage. Then you can focus on the questions just for the second passage while reading the second passage piece by piece. Only after you do that you can tackle the questions that ask questions for both passages. So review those strategies, and I hope this helps improve your reading score. See you later.